IPCC special report for 1.5 degrees states that with 1.5 degree global warming, we expect a further loss of 70 to 90% of our reef building corals. And then a 2 degrees rise would probably result in 99% of our reefs, of our corals being lost. So these are some dire projections as it relates to global warming. Currently, we are at 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial, and it is very likely that we will exceed the 1.5 by mid-century. Right? With respect to Tobago, we used a downscale projection that was created by Van Hooydonk, and they created it for the IPCC models. And this is for the worst case carbon emissions scenario, which is RCP 8.5. And essentially, it is a model for bleaching risk. And what it says on the map is that the yellow areas basically highlight that it is likely that by 2040 to 2050, we're going to get annual severe bleaching events. So you're going to get severe bleaching on an annual basis at most of our sites, with the exception of a few of our reef areas, which is the areas in green, which are likely to experience ASB in the decade after. The dots, the colors of the different sites show our ecological assessments of those reefs. So we assess for resilience, and we use the basically resilience scores along with the risk scores, which is the bleaching risk, to determine vulnerability. So what we find is that flying reef has the highest vulnerability to coral bleaching, given that it's already very degraded. It has a very poor resilience score. Whereas Booby Island in north, which is in Charlottesville in northeast Tobago, has a relatively higher resilience score and a lower risk, a relatively lower risk, and therefore would have relatively lower vulnerability. But if you use other RCP pathways, so if you use RCP 4.5, what you do find is that the risk of annual severe bleaching gets delayed by 20 years. So instead of 2050, it will be around 2070. But that will essentially give us more time to develop adaptive management practices or restoration strategies to help our reefs along into the future. So we rely heavily on, in terms of bleaching alerts and bringing awareness to potential bleaching on our reefs, we rely heavily on NOAA's Coral Reef Watch, and we use the 5-kilometer virtual station. So there's a virtual station that's focused on Trinidad and Tobago, and basically the alerts are as follows. So you get a composite map, which is generated using remotely sensed sea surface temperatures and projected for a maximum of 3 months in advance. So you have the 3 windows: so current, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months in the future. And then there are 4 levels of alerts that we that there are depending on the location on the map. So this is an example from 2022 in October. If I showed you this year, you won't be able to see the different colors because it's just all dark red. But you have 4 levels of alerts. You have bleaching watch, which is essentially like a low-level heat stress. Bleaching warning, meaning that there's enough heat stress that would probably result in bleaching if it persists. And then bleaching alert level 1, meaning that significant bleaching is likely across species and across extended areas. And then you have bleaching alert level 2, which means that widespread bleaching and coral mortality is likely. What I didn't mention is that if coral bleaches, it doesn't necessarily die, but if it's prolonged, the bleaching is prolonged, the corals lose their major source of food and they would eventually die, right? Or they become vulnerable to things like diseases, which would then result in coral mortality. So bleaching alert level 2 means that it's quite likely that the waters are hot enough for extended bleaching and extended negative impact that will result in coral mortality. So this is just a graph which shows you the changes in sea surface temperatures for Trinidad and Tobago since the 1980s up to today. So if you look at the jagged blue line, that's the measured sea surface temperatures, and that solid blue line, the light blue line, is the thermal threshold temperature, which is around 29 degrees for our corals. So you see, as in the 1990s, there's very low bleaching threats until you get to 1998, which is That was the first global bleaching event that happened. Fast forward, we're seeing more bleaching alerts happening, and in 2005, it's the first time we recorded severe bleaching on our reefs, where we lost we had about 66% bleaching. And then 2010 is when we started our monitoring, where we lost 50% of our coral cover. As you continue to move into the early 2010s, 2020, you see that bleaching alerts become more and more frequent, right? And when I joined the IME, which was in 2019, when we monitor, we recorded low-level bleaching consistently on our reefs over the last 3 years. And now we are at present at 2023 here, where the 2023 trajectory is very similar to that of 2010. So we do expect a lot of bleaching and a lot of coral mortality as a result. In fact, our bleaching alerts started 2 months earlier than the previous years, where we would get bleaching watch alerts in August. This year we got them in June. So all very concerning scenarios. So this is what it looks like today. So currently, this is we are bleaching alert level 2, and the temperatures are likely to persist that way at least for a month, if not more, right? This is related to the combination of global warming on top of El Nino conditions, which are generally more drier, warmer conditions compared to the La Nina situation we had the last 3 years, where we had wetter and cooler conditions for Trinidad and Tobago. But even with that, because of climate change, the cooler conditions, the La Nina, we still saw very low levels of bleaching every year.